Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Eniegolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, another Nigerian Economic Summit filled with government and private sector executives rolls around and ends amid a pandemic, a new recession, unprecedented youth restiveness, poverty, unemployment and an oil price crash. So in the midst of this looming threat, what has the summit come up with this year as the best way to rescue Nigeria? Can the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, the organisers of the summit, help to foster economic growth by ensuring that the right policy decisions are made to alleviate the pain? We'll speak to a member of the NESG's 26th Summit Planning Committee. And later, the US President-elect Joe Biden lines up key appointments to his incoming administration. And amongst all those was climate change as well. John Kerry, the former Secretary of State to President Obama, who took the US into the Paris Climate Accord, is going to be the new climate envoy. So what's being made of that appointment in the international scientific climate change community and in Africa, which is increasingly suffering the ravages of global warming? We'll speak to a globally recognized Nigerian scholar on environmental policy and climate change coming up. Now, as you might have heard, this year's Nigerian Economic Summit, featuring discussions around the Nigerian economy, has ended. And as always, it's come up with policies, partnerships and suggested actions that the organisers hope will result in real, sustainable and inclusive growth for Nigeria. But like the 25 other summits before it, the NESG can only hope that it won't be business as usual this year because of the uniqueness of things not just in Nigeria but around the world. For a start, there's COVID with its health and economic consequences. Then there's the End SARS protests, which point to the restiveness of Nigeria's enormous youth population. And now, of course, the country has entered into a biting recession on top of the crippling unemployment and poverty levels. So given all that, what has the summit come up with this year as the best way to rescue Nigeria as it faces not only the challenges that we've just mentioned, but additionally corruption, nepotism and problems of leadership at all levels?
Meetings to have real meaning and the required momentum, we cannot spend years pondering policy interventions. Government must reposition itself as a proactive and responsive vision custodian and policy driver, coming to the table each year having clearly identified obstacles and ready to tackle new ones. Our regulators must play their part and change their mindsets. They must act as facilitators and not dampen the enthusiasm of institutions which are trying to grow the economy. They must create a truly enabling environment.
Infrastructure, which allegedly got me out of office the first time. So you've got to deal with...
You've got to deal with hunger first.
You've got to deal with hunger first. You've got to deal with immediate gratification, if you like.
So are you blaming us?
Well, the citizenry also has a part of the blame and a part of the responsibility as well. We've got to be honest with ourselves.
There is a lot of concentration of power at the center, to the point that the federal government is so overstretched that it is not very effective in doing many things. Which leads me to the fourth, is we need to look at our constitutional arrangement and devolve more responsibilities to the states and hold them accountable. I say this because I want to give an example of one issue that faces the country and many of our states: insecurity. Governors are chief security officers in name, but unless they have a very special relationship with their commissioners of police and military commanders, they can't really get them to do what is needed to secure the state.
That's El Rufai there, who's the governor of Kaduna State, talking about the need for a form of restructuring in this country. Well, for more on what's emerged from this year's 26th Nigerian Economic Summit, I'm joined now in the studio by the private sector chair of the summit's Joint Planning Committee, Nnanna Ude. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Just summarize for us the main thrust and focus of this year's NESG Summit. I expect that coming off the back of the End SARS protests, youth development would have formed a key part of the proceedings, but what were the highlights?
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. So you can actually point to three key highlights that we will focus on post-summit. The first is subnationals. How do we empower subnationals? Because that came on the back of the last year's summit. If you remember, at the last year's summit, we focused on a 2050 vision for Nigeria, and we wanted that vision to be anchored on a partnership between the private sector and subnational governments. And the thinking behind that was that the past 24 summits before then, we had focused on engaging the federal government. But we have 36 states, 704 local government areas across the country. And for us in the private sector, we have this saying, every business is a tenant of a state. So you might be engaging with Abuja, but you have to deal with states and local government areas in doing your business. And we realized that we haven't done enough of engaging with the states. However, in 2017, we signed an MOU with the Governors Forum. We activated it last year, and we now have a roundtable with the governors. And so this summit was focused on activating that roundtable. What are the issues that the private sector will want to engage with states and local governments? So that was the planning, thinking as we approached this summit. But then, like you rightly pointed out, along came COVID. And so we had to refocus the agenda of the summit again. However,
you even had to postpone the summit.
We postponed it. That on the back of the End SARS.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The End SARS.
So that was
yes,
the second turnaround for us. So that was the first focus. Subnationals. How do we empower subnationals? What are the constitutional imperatives that we need to undertake to unlock the potentials of subnationals to take advantage of their factor endowments? So that's the first part. Second part is the SDGs. As you know, this year we are ushering into the decade of action, 10 years to meet the SDGs. And so we wanted to focus on that. We wanted to be able to have a very strong and real conversation about what we need to do to be on track to achieving those global goals. And so that was the second focus. And the third one, the youth. On the back of all the protests, we have a youth bulge. And so we realized that no matter what you sit down to plan in a room, if you don't think about what to do with youth issues, about how to engage with the youth, about how to open up participation for the youth, empowerment of the youth. So we had a couple of sessions focused on that too, and they were very, very, very insightful sessions. We had a lot of young people in there. They shared their issues. We kind of had a design workshop to kind of reimagine the frameworks around which youth empowerment can be delivered more effectively. And so these were the main focus.
And the knob of that discussion, which, as you said, was quite comprehensive around youth in Nigeria, was the need to recognize the importance of institutional reforms. Have those reforms now been recognized?
Yes, we did. In the design workshop we had, because the design workshops are essentially what they are. They are workshops. So we kind of reimagine, tear down the framework and build it back up again. So we did that, and hopefully post-summit, what we want to do is to do an assessment of all the institutional frameworks that we have in place to address youth issues and see how we can make them work better, to know which ones aren't working, to kick it out, and so which ones can be more targeted.
But these NESG summits are usually done in collaboration with the government.
Yes.
So you've got government people there. What was their reaction to what you were talking about, institutional reforms?
First of all, they shared the experiences about the challenges in implementing reforms around youth issues. And then because it's a partnership, it's an engagement. So as they were sharing those experiences, we were all having discussions about how to make it better. So we understood it is, I call it institutional isomorphism. It's not just about institutions related to the youth. You can say that for all other institutions that drive the economy. So, but we are focusing on the youth. So with them in the room, we kind of understood what it is in the steam room, how what the challenges are. And more importantly, some of those reforms, some of those processes are dated. And so you have young people now thinking about technology, artificial intelligence. So how then do you apply that in implementing the processes that are in place to deliver? Some of those are not presently recognized in the governmental frameworks that we have now.
Right.
Yeah, so that's some of the issues that came around and how we were able to review them. But the most important thing is that we had in the room active young people who had solutions to some of these problems, practical solutions,
right,
with country examples of where it's been done.
And those were probably that's probably the first time that level of interaction was taking place. So you're hoping for results.
That's the first time we've had a level of deep dive.
Right.
For the past 3-4 years, we've tried to do high-level engagements with young people. But this is the first time we're able to do a deep dive to the point where we could then begin to focus on practical solutions, actionable outcomes. And we hope that we hope to launch a platform very soon, in the next 1 or 2 months, that will then unleash the implementation.
Well, I mean, just listening to you and the earnestness with which you're approaching this, it's almost, I'm sorry to say this, lamentable to some extent, because I mean, the word hope occurs frequently in the phrases that you use. I mean, you've had lots of summits over the years. This one just ended, was the 26th in the series. How significant would you say the outcomes of the summits have been to shaping the economy of this country?
Well, like the chairman of the NESG said at the opening, we've recorded a few successes, but we haven't gone that far. That's the reality of it. If you go through past reports, you will see hundreds of recommendations that we believe, if implemented, we would not have been where we are now. But then we've had a few of them. For instance, I mean, we can always rehash these things. The GSM revolution was on the back of the summit. The summit kept advocating for it until we did it. Long before the GSM, the repeal of the foreign exchange decree was from the summit. The idea of focusing on investment promotion was from the summit. I mean, there are a couple of them like that, and they have really brought some value into the economic management process.
Yeah.
And right now, we have a partnership with the Governors Forum that came off the summit because, like I said, as soon as we realized we had to engage with the governors, we had an MOU and we have a roundtable with them and it's working. We have one with the National Assembly. We have a couple of bills that have been passed on the back of that partnership.
Well, to be fair, there seems to be, just watching some of the sessions you had, there seems to be a greater earnestness on the part of the governors. They seem to be more keen to do something because they are closer to the people. But let me ask you to stay with us because we've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead, as we continue our chat about what's emerged from this year's Nigerian Economic Summit. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyekulu. Now, nearly 30 years ago, a group of courageous business executives intent on throwing off the chains of economic state control challenged Nigeria's military rulers to open up the country's economy. They were driven by necessity, overwhelmed by the spectacular mismanagement of the economy and the repressive policies of the military. They questioned the military order, becoming at once Nigeria's first economic mutineers. They didn't know it then, but they had become the pioneers of the most dramatic economic change in Nigeria. And the independent non-profit organization they formed 3 years later, known as the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, would help to shape the historical direction of the Nigerian economy for years to come. But in a changed, pandemic-riven world, can the NESG inspire both the public and the private sectors to connect in such a way as to reverse the declining fortunes of this country?
Continue the implementation of the Economic Sustainability Plan. The plan is a 12-month plan. It's designed to help the economy through this very difficult time when we know that we're going to go into recession. And you can see that the result of the implementation so far is paying good results. Yes, we are technically in a recession, but it's not as deep as we had projected. The Q3 GDP report was supposed to have been minus 7.2%. So at minus 3.62%, it's better than what we projected, better than what the IMF and the World Bank has projected, and better than all economics that are comparable to Nigeria.
There is a speedy pathway out of the current recession. If we quicken the implementation of the Economic Sustainability Plan, In addition with what we have done for MSMEs, the increased jobs and local production from agriculture, from housing and solar installations will serve to boost the economy.
The Nigerian Vice President there, and before him, the country's Finance Minister. And with me in the studio, the Private Sector Chair of the NESG's Joint Planning Committee for this year's summit, Nnanna Ude. Thank you very much for staying with us. And before we went on break, we were talking a little bit about the challenge of implementation. I suppose the problem is always the adoption of your resolutions and advice to the government. How would you rate the implementation of your suggestions over the years? Poor, average, or good?
I will say below average. Below average.
Right.
That, again, primarily can be you can point to the fact that over the past 25 summits, we have not just walked through about 8 administrations, but those administrations are characterized by different epochs. We started with the military administration, then we moved over to a civilian administration, and then in 2015, after 16 years of one party being in office, we got a new party. So each time you transit into a new epoch, it's a different negotiating platform and imperative that you are confronted with. And primarily the NESG and the first summit, the focus, like you rightly said, was to move the economy from state control to a market-driven economy. And with each transiting leadership, they come with their own philosophy. We need to re-educate, and then we begin to re-engage, and then hopefully begin to implement. So that in itself has introduced a few challenges. That's why we're below average. I'm not going to advocate the East Asian model, but you find that in the East Asian economies where they were able to achieve sustained growth, most of the time it was under one leadership for 20 to 25 years. We are not advocating
so political stability
is key.
Right.
So what I think personally, I think the challenge before us as a country is to agree on an economic model that can transit through administrations every 4 years. Okay, right now we are working on a 2050 vision agenda, which is 30 years. And within these 30 years, we have probably about 5 elections that could produce 5 different sets of presidents. What's the guarantee that the vision 2050 will remain and pass through this 4 or 5 presidents between now and 2050? We are doing.
Well, the fact is that there is no guarantee.
Yeah, there is.
And that's because you don't have institutions that operate independent of the government of the day.
Yeah, but more importantly, we actually need first a national consensus.
Right.
We need to agree on where we want to head in as a nation. And that means every single one of us, which is why to a large extent, what has happened with the NSAS seems to be, the NSAS protest seems to be an opportunity for us to galvanize our young people, because they are the ones that will be here for the next 30 years. So if we are able to take advantage of this to create an agenda that they can drive, we will support them, work with them, and that's what we're trying to achieve. That's why we had a lot of sessions at the summit.
Right.
Because we realized that we can sit down and plan for the next 30 years. I don't know how many of us will be here by then. But these young people, the 20s, the early 30s, they are the ones. So if you can create a national agenda, give us a vision for them to drive, then we will most likely be there. So irrespective of who is in government.
And of course that vision will be anchored on economic growth.
Precisely.
Without a shadow of a doubt. The issue of COVID-19, of course, its impact on the Nigerian economy, I'm sure that came up during your discussions. What was your assessment of that, and what did you come up with as the best way for this country to recover, having now entered another recession?
First of all, like the theme of the summit, we wanted, first of all, to begin to build stronger partnerships.
Right.
Because once you're able to strengthen the partnerships between the public and the private sector, and again, we'll keep adding under the youth, you can then have a common solution that everybody will then have his hand on deck to push through. And so that's the first. So we can then agree on the specific policy priorities, the specific measures that we need to take. A few of them came up. But what we are doing now is to distill the discussions and then identify the ones that were able to generate a wider, broader consensus. So we really have not come up with that now. We're working, we just finished.
I understand that, but
so,
beyond
but we need to build it first on
Right.
partnerships. We need to build it on not just implementing what we have agreed to, but sustaining that implementation.
Well, the point for a lot of people is that they see that. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but for the ordinary person on the street, it's a talking shop because they've got to deal with the economic reality at present. And Nigeria, obviously, a country that hasn't saved a lot of money over the years. It continues to borrow a lot of money to balance even its budget. Even it was doing that even in good times. And of course, with the oil markets badly hit, the deficit is deepening. So there is an urgency to what the Economic Summit Group are doing now, and that collaboration with government, isn't it?
Yeah, so the first thing came up during the discussion, we need to stop digging the hole. I mean, we just have to stop digging, because we've been digging in deep, so we need to stop digging the hole. And there are a few options. I'm very reluctant to begin to spell them out because they came varied options.
Right, and we've only got about 3 minutes.
Yeah,
so we need to hit the nail on the head.
One of the key dimensions we took at the summit is, first of all, to identify our growth sectors, the new growth drivers out of the pandemic, and begin to throw more investments into those growth drivers. That's one. Two, we also identify the fragile sectors and work out measures to strengthen the fragile sectors, because at the end of the day, like you said, we need to be able to generate growth.
Right.
And we need monetary policy to do that. We need fiscal policies that will do that. We need to, we were happy to hear from the minister that they are considering reopening the borders. We should do that like yesterday, so that we can begin to promote trade, regional trade and global trade.
But in the medium to long term, I was listening to El Rufai, the governor of Kaduna State, talking about the need for restructuring. Is that something that you get, because you said you're engaging the National Assembly, and restructuring has to come through the National Assembly. You see what I mean?
Yes.
Is that something that you're discussing with them, political reform, which would then lead to economic reform?
No, but
because we've got about a minute left.
Yeah, but the point is this. Yes, that's what we are doing, but we actually want to focus the current constitutional review process to be more of an economic reform review of the Constitution. Because if you discuss it more from political terms, it develops different trajectories.
Right, I see what you mean.
But let us now argue that the current process of reviewing the Constitution is strictly for economic growth. And what does that mean? Going to the exclusive list to identify those items on the exclusive list that can move to the concurrent list to enable the state governments be more active in economic growth and development. There are a lot of them. For instance, why will a state government not be able to do railway on its own without getting approval from the federal government? Why should Lagos state government require approval from the federal government to develop its own waterways? Minerals and mines, for instance. Why should Abuja give you a license to mine, and then you go to the state and begin to look for certificate of occupancy for the land where it is below?
There's a lot to be done.
So
but
we need to do
I'm
all
glad
of
that you're saying that you've started the journey. So let's hope you get to the end of it for the benefit of this country. Nnanna Ude, who is the private sector chair of the NESG's Joint Planning Committee for this year's summit. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Charles.
You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including the international scientific community looks to Joe Biden's appointment of a climate envoy as a signal of change to come. Stay with us.